Welcome to Fluent English, the podcast. Today, we're starting with the powerful story of a stubborn stonemason named Cale and the quiet wisdom of an old woman's rain barrel. So, let's get started. Cale was the finest stonemason in the valley, a guy who lived and breathed granite. He was also the definition of tough. 6'2", hands like cinder blocks, and a jaw that looked permanently set to determined. He was the kind of man who just didn't cry. Not when his carving broke, not when the tax man came, and certainly not when life got rough. He figured tears were just wasted water, a sign you'd run out of grit. The little village of Oak Haven was usually picture perfect, nestled right next to a winding, generous river. But then came the summer of the Big Dry. The river, their lifeline, didn't just shrink. It vanished. It left behind a cracked, sun-baked scar through the middle of town. The air felt thick, heavy with dust and despair. Every morning, Cale would get up, ignoring the constant throb in his shoulders, grab his chisel, and try to carve hope out of stone. But the tension was getting to him. He was snapping at his apprentices, and the beautiful eagle sculpture he was working on looked stiff, lifeless, just like Cale felt inside. He was so busy trying to be the unmoving rock for everyone else, he was starting to chip away at his own core. One suffocating evening, his elderly neighbor, Elara, called him over. Elara wasn't tough like Cale. She was practical. She stood by a giant, ancient rain barrel made of dark, weathered oak. "Hey, Cale," she said, her voice dry as a whisper. "Take a look at this." Cale crossed his arms, leaning against the fence. "What's there to see, Elara? A barrel of water? It's a thimble compared to what we need. We're talking millions of gallons, Elara. This isn't going to save the crops." Elara just smiled, a soft, wise crinkle around her eyes. She dipped a small metal cup into the barrel. The water inside was perfectly still, reflecting the deep purple of the sunset. She walked over to her porch garden, a tiny, struggling patch of basil and peppers, and slowly, deliberately, poured the cup out, letting the water soak into the dry, thirsty soil around the roots. "You're right, Cale. This barrel isn't a flood," she said, returning. "But when the great river is gone, what does it leave behind? A huge, useless, empty space, right? Nothing to grab onto." She tapped the side of the barrel. "But the barrel, it holds every single drop it ever caught. It kept the promise those tiny raindrops made. It seems small, but it's a stored reserve. And right now, these drops are the only reliable thing we have to keep the small vital things alive." Cale went back to his workshop, but the stone felt cold and wrong. He couldn't shake the image of the rain barrel, those small, isolated drops, held safe until the moment they were absolutely necessary. He picked up his chisel, aiming for the eagle's eye, but his hand trembled. He was exhausted. He was terrified. He was sad for his town. He was furious at himself for not fixing it. Finally, the pressure valve blew. It wasn't a slow leak. It was a sudden, wrenching surge. Cale dropped the chisel with a clang that echoed in the silent shop and sank onto his stool. He buried his face in his hands, and the tears came, hot and fast, soaking the rough fabric of his canvas pants. He wasn't crying over a specific thing. He was crying over the whole awful summer, over the weight he'd been carrying, over every unspoken fear he had stuffed down and locked away. He didn't try to stop it. He just let the wave roll right over him until there was nothing left but quiet, shaky breaths. When he finally lifted his head, the workshop was dark. He felt drained, sure, but he also felt impossibly clear. It was like someone had taken a scouring pad to his brain. He wasn't broken. He was emptied of the gunk. He looked down at the granite eagle. Where he had seen confusion and tension yesterday, he now saw the next line he needed to carve. He realized his tears weren't a flood of weakness. They were his personal rain barrel. They were the stored emotional reserves that had been pressing on him, sapping his energy. By finally letting them out, he hadn't destroyed his strength. He had watered the small, vital seeds of resilience, creativity, and calm within himself. He picked up his chisel, his grip steady. He knew the drought wasn't over, but for the first time in months, he felt ready to face the long haul. He had his own reservoir now, and he knew that every drop of true emotion, whether joy or sorrow, was a necessary part of keeping the light on inside. And that, my friends, is exactly the key to English fluency. We often wait for the big flood of perfect knowledge, but real progress happens in those small, consistent drops. Applying this story to your English journey, think about Cale's struggle and Elara's wisdom through the lens of language learning. First, consider the rain barrel of practice. Cale learned that the drops of water kept safe were the most reliable resource. Stop waiting for a full, uninterrubisoft out to study. That time never comes. Instead, be like Elara's tiny ladle. Use 5 minutes in the morning to review vocabulary flashcards. Use 10 minutes on your commute to listen to this podcast. These isolated tiny moments are your stored reserves that keep your language garden alive during the busy, stressful droughts of your week. Second, remember the necessity of the leak. Cale thought tears were wasted water, but they actually released the pressure that was crippling his creativity. Many English learners think a mistake, a small grammatical slip or an imperfect pronunciation, is a sign of failure. It's not. Think of that error as a necessary leak that releases internal tension and shows you exactly where you need to focus next. Don't bottle up the fear of speaking. Let the errors flow so you can learn from them and feel lighter. And finally, we have the clarity of intention. Once Cale allowed himself to empty his emotional burden, his vision for his carving became absolutely clear. When you speak, stop focusing on having a perfect accent or the most complex sentence structure. That is seeking an impossible perfection. Instead, focus on clarity and intention. Are you communicating your idea? Are you connecting with the person you're talking to? If yes, you are fluent. Perfection is the enemy of progress.